Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He comes to us from Texas. His name is Gary Revel. Last name is spelled Revel. If you're watching this on X, Twitter, Rumble, or Rockfin, you can see the cover of his book, To Live or Maybe Not is the title. And he's written many different editions. He's also busy. He kind of has cleaning up to do. We got started a little late. He has more important things to handle than maybe do these interviews because he was there's always these storms that roll through Texas, and he was unfortunately one of the people who had their home damaged. So he's handling that and doing this. But I read through the book. There's a lot of interesting things, and particularly his government service, his time in the music industry, both Nashville, Hollywood, and his association with the Martin Luther King investigation in the 70s. But he can talk more about that. So Gary Revel, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to see you. Good to hear from you. Love your show. I always have a lot of interesting things coming out of that. So thank you for
good. Thanks. So for people who may not have heard your name, I mean your bio kind of, you go back and you joined the military very young. Maybe you can just talk about kind of how you got started and then some of your kind of clandestine work and what led you up to being involved in the investigation of MLK.
Well, let me hit the really high points of everything so that people can see the journey that I'm on. When I was in high school in Bonifay, Florida, I was at Holmes County High School in Bonifay, Florida. I had two brothers already in Vietnam, in the Navy, serving in Vietnam. And I was already meeting with the Navy recruiters there at the high school. And my principal sent me to meet with my congressman. And in that meeting, I was asked to do a test, to take a test, and he told me that he was considering nominating me to go to the Naval Academy. He knew my two older brothers were serving, and so he thought I would be a good candidate for that. So I took a test, and he told me to wait. Bob Sykes was his name, Robert Sykes, Congressman Robert Sykes. And he told me he said, I know you're anxious to get in. He said, I want you to wait until you hear from me before you make a decision. Well, I didn't wait. I just couldn't wait. I graduated from high school and I had to get into the fight. So I just joined as an enlisted man. And one day I'm in my barracks and my company commander came to me and said, Gary, they want you at the personnel office. So I ran to the personnel office, which you have in boot camp. If you're not marching with your company, you have to run. So I ran to the personnel office. I walked into the personnel officer's office, and he looked at me very strange, and he said, Seaman Recruit Revel, come in here and sit down. He said, your congressman has written us a letter, and today he called us, and it seems you scored higher than anybody he's ever had take that test for the Naval Academy application, and he said he wants you in an officer program right away. Well, that is the day that my life changed. That is when I went from just a seaman recruit to someone who was taking two paths. One was looking like what you look like, and another was working in a whole different capacity and nobody knowing about it, which ended up with working with guys like the men in black that people see, and doing a lot of, just dangerous. I got shot, I got nicked. I mean, just things. But I was loving it. I loved what I was doing. So that was the beginning. And then, of course, I'd already been in music. I'd had my first rock and roll band when I was 15 years old. And so I was there in the Navy and in San Diego and singing in a local club. When the manager announced one night that I'd be getting out of the Navy soon, he was telling me, well, you won't see Gary much longer because he's getting out of the Navy soon. A guy came up to me and handed me his card when I took a break, and I just put it in my pocket, which I normally did when I got cards. When I got back to my room that night, I took it out and looked at it, and he was an agent in Hollywood, California. So when I got out of the Navy, I was honorably discharged from the Navy. I went to Hollywood, and that started the whole movies. I got into the movies, helped produce movies. First recording studio I ever walked into was Capitol Records, and I did my first recordings at Capitol.
That's the famous building. That's the almost looks like a series of discs right there in Hollywood.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's a very, very, very famous. Now,
Landmark, really.
Yeah, right. Now you mentioned something about something that was in my book, and I'm going to explain how that relates to all this. I was on my way. I had my guitar. I had a friend with me who was helped me write songs and sang background. And I had my guitar over my shoulder, and he was when we were walking down Hollywood Boulevard early one night, and this Rolls Royce pulls up beside us, and there was two men in it, and the one driving, the steering wheel was on the other side, so the one driving was near the sidewalk, and he said, "Hey, where are you guys going?" And I told him, I said, "Well, we're going to an audition." It was another well-known group that we were auditioning for, but we won't get into that. But anyway, so he said, "Well, look, you can audition for us." He said, "Come on, hop in." He said, we can do more for you than they can." So we got in this Rolls Royce, and we went up into Hollywood Hills, and we were sitting in this big living room with a big curtain drawn across the front. We were sitting on the sofa, and one guy was sitting in a chair on the right, and one was to the left. And I sang a couple of songs, and the guy on my right, he reached over and he pushed a button on the wall, and the curtains just rolled back like that, just like that. And before us, was the city of Los Angeles. All the lights just go. It looked like it went on forever below us because we were up in the hills there. And he stood up and he did a flourish with his arm. He said, "Gary, the world is yours." Well, that was fine. And it was only a few weeks later when I read the contract that he wanted me to sign that I realized it was what they called a star making contract. He had just sold Michael Cole, who was a star in those three people in Mod Squad, that TV show Mod Squad. Michael Cole, he had signed Michael Cole just several months earlier, and he had just sold Michael Cole's contract to Paramount, or to the people who were running that show. So that's how connected he was. And he guaranteed me stardom and just anything I wanted practically. But the contract that he wanted me to sign required for me to let him make almost every decision a person can make. They even wanted to tell me where I would get my clothes cleaned, what dry cleaner I would use, who would take my pictures, who would be with me in the pictures that we're taking, where I would go to dinner, who I would go to dinner with, who I would be seen in public with. I mean, and they wanted 7 years.
Wow.
7 years, a 7-year contract, 50% of everything I made plus expenses. And there was just something in me. I mean, I was a Christian, and there was just something about turning my life over to another human being to that extent that just didn't work for me. So
you're like an indentured servant almost.
Oh,
that's how long the indentured servitude term was when you came from the old country to the United States. It was 7 years. So
exactly
it's the same number. Wow. So yes, but that was the way it kind of worked back then. That's the way the Hollywood machine kind of worked.
Exactly. And to some extent it still does. I mean, to some extent there's still a lot. It has to be a lot of control. People are going to roll in, hundreds of millions of dollars in a year's time. There's got to be a lot of controls put on them, So, and I understand that, but it didn't work for me. Now, about the thing in the book, well, that same guy that I'm talking about, and I'll never tell his name, but the same guy, we were at Bob Hope's house one night at a party in Palm Springs. And the way that would work, we would get up in the morning, and if it was overcast, and and cool, maybe going to be a little rainy, so we couldn't go to the pool. We'd go to the Burbank Airport and hop on a jet and go to Palm Springs. And then like one night we played Monopoly with a guy came in with a suitcase full of cash, and we played Monopoly with real money.
Wow.
That's the lifestyle.
Right. Bob Hope had a famous kind of mansion there in Palm Springs.
Oh yeah,
too.
Yeah, he sure did. And I met his son and some other folks. But now that night's that little tidbit that I have in my book that you mentioned was the night that I really the rubber hit the road for me to really understand what was going on. The attorney that was still trying to get me to sign the contract, and he had already tried he took me to the Brown Derby one night and told me over dinner, look, if you don't sign this contract, you don't know who you're saying no to. You'll never have a record deal. You'll never get a record out, and you'll never work in this industry. The whole spiel.
That's a very famous restaurant in Hollywood back in the
Brown
days.
Derby, right? It
Brown
was.
Derby was it. I don't know if it still has the same reputation, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, back then it was still on Vine Street, right there. Still had that Brown Derby top. Yeah, it was really a very very exclusive place in a lot of ways. So I'm there at that party, and so he's still kind of giving me the spiel of all what I need to understand to sign that contract and to come into their fold, so to speak. So he takes me, he says, come with me, I want to show you something. And we go into a part of the house that we were like the second floor, and the window looked out on the pool area. He said, look at this. And I looked out, and there was an older man in the spa area, the whirlpool area, with a little boy, and doing some sexual things with the little boy. And he said, look at that. He said, you know who that is, don't you? And I looked at him and I thought, well, I might. And he told me, he said, now, do you think that he's going to let anything happen to us? You think we're going to ever get charged with a crime or anything of that sort? He said, there's too much for these people to lose. So at that point, I knew that I had to get out of that.
Right, he was like a federal judge or something, right? So this stuff goes way back. This is what, late 60s?
This was 1970, late 70 or 71.
Gotcha, 71.
Yeah.
Wow. And so really dark stuff. Yeah.
I was 20, 21 years old, something like that.
Bob Hope is featured in Eyes Wide Shut. They have a Bob Hope mask. And I think that they're probably referencing all that stuff, that he was known to have those types of parties, just like in Eyes Wide Shut, the movie.
Right.
But the parties were in Palm Springs at his huge palatial,
especially
mid-mansion.
I never heard even a rumor that Bob himself ever participated in anything like that himself. But a lot did go on at his house, and most of the time he was away. He was rarely there.
He's a known ladies' man. He was a known kind of.
Oh yeah.
Wow. So that's kind of like your intro. So this stuff goes back in Hollywood and the entertainment industry from its inception, really in the 20s and 30s, like this kind of like cartelization or networking where everybody's corrupt. It's like the city runs the business runs the city, right? Almost like a company town. Yeah. So where did you go from there? So you're 21. Music. You'd spent time in Nashville too, right? I mean, you kind of.
Well, that's when I had a record deal with BG Records. I put out a few records. I did a soundtrack. I helped make a motion picture called The Last of the American Hobos. It's a docudrama type thing. Then I was on the BG Records label. Then I get a call from home. My mother still lived in Florida, and my little brother and my brother Benny came home on leave. And they called me and they said he was home and he wanted to see me. So I left Hollywood, went to Central Florida where they were living, where my mom was living at the time. And from there, of course, me and Benny and mother and my brother, my younger brother, we all had some good times for a couple of weeks. Then I went to New York City because I had some friends there from Hollywood who had gone there and was with a record company there, and they wanted me to come up. I was actually in Jimmy Durani's house there, staying at his house on Long Island for a while I was there. And then, of course, I went down to Harlem and Manhattan and all of that stuff. Was there for a while. Then I went to Memphis. Juddy Phillips, who was my manager and the producer in Hollywood, he produced the Last American Hobo soundtrack album and produced a couple of my first singles. He was the son of Judd Phillips Sr., Judson Phillips, who was Sam Phillips' brother. Now, Sam and Judson, they started Sun Records. They owned Sun Records, and they started Elvis Presley. They started Jerry Lee Lewis. They started Johnny Cash, several other, major stars, R&B and rock, and even some country. But Juddy had asked me to come to Memphis. So I went, and I was living with Juddy on Main Street there in Memphis, a really nice apartment building right there on Main Street. And I met Jerry Lee Lewis. I played with Jerry Lee Lewis a couple times, played guitar and sang with him in his club there in the alley. He had a club in the alley at the time. In his office, I met Elvis Presley. Now, I've got an interesting story about Elvis if you want to hear it.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
We were at a golf tournament, and Elvis had a special tent out there, little table, and some of us, the Phillips family, some of them, and Elvis and Colonel Parker, he was Tom Parker. He was sitting there with Elvis, and some of the press were sitting around. And one of the press said to Colonel Tom, he said, "Well," he said, "I'm hearing that Elvis made $3 million last year." He said, "Y'all should be happy with that." And Tom Parker looked at him. He said, "Well, yeah, but if you make $3 million and spend $5 million, what do you got?" And he looked, and Parker looked at Elvis saying that, like, you spend too much money. but yeah, that stuck with me. I tell you, I never forgot that, because it was just. But you never know. Now I hear that actually, a lot of Tom Parker's stories just wasn't true. That he kept a lot of that money, without even letting Elvis know that it was, it'd come in.
I believe it. Right. So, so then, like, you're we're in that kind of group. Those guys, the Phillips brothers, B.B. King, Johnny Cash, Roy Orbison, Carl Perkins.
That's right. Exactly. All those others, right? Yeah, I was at B.B. King's place just a couple of weeks ago. I went to Memphis and was there at the B.B. King Blues Club. I loved Bill Street, and all that area. Of course, I was at the Lorraine Motel and the Civil Rights Museum there also. I spent almost a whole day down there, with those people.
And that's where MLK got shot, right?
Right. That's right.
And how did you end up getting involved in that whole kind of situation? Go from music to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, right? Was it the church committee that you worked on?
Well, no, a friend of mine worked, an attorney friend of mine worked on the church committee, Jack McNeil in Memphis. He's passed away now, but he helped me out with some of the MLK stuff as well. Helped me, make some contacts and stuff. He lived in Memphis, and he had been the attorney. He was the attorney that was going to the grand jury to get a new trial set for James Earl Ray. And his name is Jack McNeil, Attorney Jack McNeil. And if anybody wants to look it up, they can find out about it. The day that he was scheduled to go before the grand jury, he got a call about an hour before he was supposed to be at the courtroom, and it was the Memphis Police Department. And they said, "Jack, you need to come down here. We need to talk to you." So he went down to the Memphis Police Department, and they had a woman there who was saying that he kissed her without her permission, and they were bringing charges against him. and he lost his law license for at least a year, maybe two, because of that. Plus, it derailed him. He couldn't follow up with bringing that material to the grand jury to get a new trial for James Earl Ray. I mean, that's how slick and how precise the effort to keep the facts of the Martin Luther King assassination hidden continued even then. And that was maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago or something that happened. He's passed away now, but that was how it was still happening even back then, years after it was all over,
Because the Memphis PD was implicated, right? Or something.
Well, yeah. Well, Frank Holloman was not only chief of police, but he was the head of the fire department at the same time, at that time, which, right away, a big city, right away, you would think, there might be something wrong with that to start with. But then it turned out that he had worked with J. Edgar Hoover as well. He had an office very close to J. Edgar's at one time. And so he was J. Edgar Hoover's man in Memphis. And so that's why he was able, he had people in the windows at the firehouse right there beside the hotel, looking out the window, watching. And that's why he was able to have so much control over the scene and over everything to make sure that any real evidence of that killing was either destroyed or never got out.
Right. And MLK went there because there was some dispute with the trash things, right? Wasn't there supposedly somebody got injured? Did you think there was anything suspicious about that? That he was drawn to Memphis?
Well, I did. I haven't written about that, or I may have just touched on it at one time or another. And when I investigated the King assassination, I found some stuff about that. So somebody had been working on those trucks, on those garbage trucks. Somebody had been hurt, or even somebody had possibly even been killed. And the cover up was even in place back then, for these kind of things, because these were black people who, worked hard. I mean, and they got paid very little. And that's what brought Martin Luther King to Memphis, is he came there to fight for these garbage workers to get a better deal for them. So, it's the whole thing is just full of little catches,
Right. Maybe for people who don't know the MLK story, maybe you can tell what the cover story is and then what you think really happened after you investigated it.
Well, the cover story among the agencies back then and among those who did not like King was that he was just a troublemaker, and he would come to town and he would have marches and he would stir people up, and Southerners back then, white Southerners that were in power, they did not like that at all. They hated Martin Luther King. J. Edgar Hoover hated him. Lyndon Johnson hated him. And none of them wanted him to live. They were all happy when he died. And of course, some of them helped him die. So,
right. They were good friends, Johnson and Edgar Hoover. So there's this connection, J. Edgar Hoover, the local police chief, fire chief, and Johnson. So they're all surrounding that.
They were all connected, exactly. And it was no effort for them to do this thing and get away with it. It was they just, all they had to do was do their job and keep doing it the way they were doing it. They didn't have to really go to any extremes. And then right away, if you remember, right away, Johnson, after JFK's death, and he was president immediately, so he was able to put together that Warren Commission right away and make sure that the public was told that they were convinced that only Lee Harvey Oswald could have done that.
Right. And same thing with James Earl Ray, right? So you write in your book, there was a witness who saw James Earl Ray like at a telephone booth or something. Like, there's no way he was even at the hotel, much like Oswald being at the book depository. He might not even have been there, right?
Well, he wasn't in that upstairs room at that time. We know that he was downstairs in the lunchroom. He would have had to have been super man to have been up there and shot that shot and then been down there drinking a Coke in front of the lunchroom, eating a sandwich 2 minutes later, you know. So, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. James Earl Ray was about 3 blocks away at a service station when Martin Luther King was shot. And then on his drive back around, he heard over the radio, Martin Luther King has been shot. And he told me, that's when he knew I'd been set up. So that's when he hightailed it out of Memphis back to Atlanta. And the fact is, and I've talked to many, I'm okay. Let me go back to one step here and tell you how it came about that I investigated the King assassinations. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, please, yes.
Okay. So what happened? I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time. I was working for Acuff Rose, writing songs and recording music for them. Acuff Rose back then was run by Roy Acuff and Wesley Rose, and Roy Acuff was the grandfather of country music. And, you know, they ran the Grand Ole Opry and all that. Well, I was there doing that, and anyone who knew me, other than my friend Jack Kershaw, the attorney, and just a few, you know, maybe a judge or two or something, only thought of me as a songwriter in Nashville, songwriter and recording artist. They had no idea that I'd been in naval intelligence. They had no idea that I was still doing investigations for Jack Kershaw while I was a singer and a songwriter. So what happened was one day I'm sitting at my desk in Jack's office, which was maybe 10 feet from his desk. We were in the same room. And he walked over and he laid down a newspaper down with a story in it about him taking on the James Earl Ray case. He became James Earl Ray's attorney. And he said, I want you to put some of your investigative work to a good purpose. He said, I want you to investigate the assassination of Martin Luther King. Well, I didn't say, yay, I want to do it, you know, because I knew from my own experience working for the government, you know, during the Vietnam War, that these are dangerous things, that you don't want to just jump into them without knowing what you're doing. So I said, well, let me think about it. Now, the church that I was going to was having what's called a rolling revival. And we would have a church service in one church one night, then go to another the next night, and another the next night. And about the third or fourth night, I was going to all these things. About the third or the fourth night, I was in a black church in Nashville. And the pastor was someone I had met. We knew each other, but he knew nothing about me other than that I was, you know, just a friend of Jack's and a songwriter and, you know, a member of the church, that particular denomination. But after he finished preaching, I was sitting about the second to the last seat in the back. He came back over to me and he said, "Gary," he said, the Holy Spirit has told me that I have to tell you something. And I said, okay, what did the Holy Spirit have to say? And he said, God wants you to know that you have to get out of playing around in the shallow water and get on out there where it's deep. Well, he had no idea what I was considering. But I knew, when he said that, I knew exactly that God was telling me, you're going to investigate the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And that's when I decided, okay, God, I'll do it. You know?
And that picture, if people are watching this is you, right, with James Earl Ray and Kershaw and Ray's brother, right?
Oh yeah, there's several pictures of us during
Jim
that
McClellan.
time.
You couldn't publish things, like, people may not know this, but older people like me know that you couldn't kind of publish really incisive investigative journalism stuff on the major newspapers. So you had to kind of go through like Playboy or Penthouse or really different magazines and stuff like that, different means. They didn't have the internet, so yeah.
Exactly. And there was really so much control back then. I mean, certain agencies had people in as assignment editors or executive producers or producers in all the major networks, all the major newspaper publishers all had connections with the kind of people that would make sure that certain things did not get uncovered.
Right. And very active in all these cases, MLK, RFK, JFK, same kind of things happened. But what was your take on talking to James Earl Ray? Because, I mean, you talk about it in your book. There's this mysterious figure, Raoul. Ray kind of moves around in strange ways, ends up in Canada. I think he went to, he didn't get arrested right away.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. And how that all developed was when Jack asked me to take the case, and then I decided I would do it. I went back to Jack and I said, look, I have decided that I will investigate this with you and for the House Assassinations Committee. But the first thing I have to do is I have to go to Brushy Mountain Prison and I have to sit down with James Earl Ray. I've got to look him in the eye. I've got to shake his hand, and I've got to talk with him and get the essence of his personality and his being. Because what I found when I worked for the government during the Vietnam War, I found I came to a time where I could really talk to someone for 5 minutes or so, and I could get a sense of whether or not they were a killer or not, whether they really had it in them to commit cold-blooded murder. And I found that because there's a purity in a person, there's a pure evil, and there's a purity on the good side. And if you've done this as much as I have, and you did as much as I had back then, you can sense that. You get to where you can. So I told him, I said, I've got to meet James Earl Ray first. So he arranged it, and I went to Brushy Mountain Prison. I spent the first time about 3 hours with James, and I told him, I said, look, we talked about our military. See, he had been an MP, in Europe for the Army. So he had a level of understanding about you only do, what you're told, and there's a limit to what you can know, and you only know what you have to know to do a particular job. So he was into all of that, and we were able to understand each other well. And I said, now you tell me whatever you want to tell me. It will never go further than right here, but I need to know the truth. I need to know what really happened. And and he told me his story, and he probably told me things and in ways that he never told anybody else. And that's why I can tell people without any qualms that I'm the real thing. I'm the one who really. I'm not an author who researched this stuff of what other people did. I'm the person who did it. So that you're getting it right from the horse's mouth.
What did Ray tell you that differentiated that the public may not know?
Well, he told. Okay, I can tell you some things that the public don't know. Number one, when he was there in the Memphis jail, he was under 24-hour-a-day lights. They psychologically sabotaged that man to keep him confused and unable to think straight, and recorded him. He knew that cameras and audio was watching him all the time, so he had never had a moment of privacy the whole time he was there. And his attorney told him, if you don't plead guilty, if you don't sign this stipulation saying that you're guilty to these things, we're going to put your brother in prison, and we're going to pick up your father, who we know is an escaped convict. He's done nothing wrong. He's kept clean. He's abiding the law, but we can still get him and put him back in prison. His father was in his 60s or 70s. So we're going to put your father in your prison. We're going to put your brother in prison. And plus, you're going to get the chair. We're going to prosecute you and make sure you get the chair. So you're looking at getting the chair, electric chair, and dying, your father and your brother being in prison, or you sign this stipulation saying that you're guilty. So that's why he signed it, but he never pled guilty. And that's something people don't understand. If you go and you research, if you go and you read the transcript of that guilty plea hearing that he did in Memphis, during that hearing, He told me, and it's written right there. He told me, he said, I stood up in court and I told the judge, I'm pleading guilty because of what my attorney told me, but I don't agree with the prosecutor. Well, the prosecutor is the one who's bringing the charges that he's guilty, right? You can't plead guilty and say, but I don't agree with the charges, or you're not really pleading guilty. Well, at that time, Jimmy told me, I got where I called James O'Ray Jimmy. Jimmy told me that his attorney reached over, he stood up, he was standing up, and he took Jimmy by the right shoulder with his left hand, and he pushed him back down into his chair. And he said, just go on, Judge. Just no. So, so now Judge Battle at that point, and I've talked to a lot of attorneys about this and a lot of judges, and most of them agree at that point, the judge should have said, okay, wait a minute. This, you can't plead guilty and say you don't agree with the charges. It's either one or the, you're pleading guilty to the charges. So you've got to agree with the charges if you're pleading guilty. Right. Well, he didn't do it. They just rushed by it. They convicted him and sent him to prison for 99 years. Now, the night that Jimmy went to prison and got a good night's sleep, the next morning he woke up. He said, when I woke up the next day, I had the clearest head I'd had in months. He said, I immediately wrote Judge Battle a letter asking him for a new trial. Now, back then, that was an official document requesting a new trial, and it should have been granted. He should have gotten a trial because he never had a trial. He asked for a trial in that letter, and he had never had a trial. All he had was a guilty plea hearing, and he refuted the charges in that letter and said, I don't, and I want a trial. Well, wow. Judge Battle, and I talked to his wife about this later on during my investigation. The day that he died, that letter that James O'Ray wrote him was on the desk. Judge Battle's wife told me that the letter was laying there, and he had the papers out. He was going to give James O'Ray a new trial. Then later during the day, he was found with his head on the table and he was dead.
Wow. I feel like that's what Sirhan did too. Pled guilty too.
Yeah.
I don't know if they even went to trial. I mean, it's weird because these are like killings that happen back to back, month apart.
Right.
But you said you knew Bill Pepper too. He passed away recently, but he became the King family's attorney, right? Like they trusted him. And then we talked also in the pre-show, Judge Brown is still around too.
That's right.
They did the civil case too.
Yeah, both of those men have tried very hard to uncover these things and bring them to the public so people can understand. And and just it's just funny. And you can imagine. For many, many years, I would not speak about these things because my brother had been killed. While I was investigating the assassination, I got a call from my mother. It said, Cecil Ray Finnegan Jr., that was my brother. He was from another father, but he was my younger brother. It said, he's dead. And I said, well, what happened? She said, well, I went to the store. I came home and the front door of the house was open. I walked through the house. I went to his bedroom. I called him. I looked in. He wasn't there. And so the back door, we had built a Florida room on the back of the house, and it was a step down, and then the back door opened into the backyard. And she said the back door was open. So I went to the back door, and she said, as I stepped into the frame of the door, I looked, into the garage to the right. The garage was to the right and kind of in the back of the house. And the side door of the garage was open, and my son, Cecil Ray Finnegan Jr., 19 years old, a young blonde-haired, part American Indian boy, was hanging by his neck dead. And she had to go in and cut him down and try to revive him. Now, this happened during my investigation.
And there's a lot of suspicious things that happened. All that investigation, all that stuff that went on the HUAC or whatever. So many people died. I mean, you talked about that one. Sullivan was an FBI agent too.
That's right.
He's part of the death list. Like these guys got close to stuff, and somebody said they got to get rubbed out. And when you in your book too, like you named people that I would not or had not associated with the MLK crime, with just all the mob bosses in the U.S. pretty much.
Right.
I mean, why do you think that the mob had something to do with it?
Well, Carlos Marcello himself told me that he said I couldn't do this. And when I was talking about who killed King and who killed, I told him, I said we know that you had something to do with it, and I said you want to talk to me rather than being subpoenaed to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Well, they ended up subpoenaing me anyway. That's the way they worked. But anyway, he told me, he said only the commission. He said the commission, has to make an order for someone as high profile as a Martin Luther King or John Kennedy or Robert. They have to order it from the very top. The families that, and it's not now. A lot of people think it's only the American families that have to do with this, but it was the Italian. Italian folks too had something to do with that. It was, of course, American Italians, but it's also, there's still, even to this day, they send mafia people to prison all the time in Italy because they're still there even to this day.
There's still murders, killings, bombings, people dying, prosecutors dying, really vicious stuff happening in Italy, certain parts of Italy. There's still mob fights and everything. I mean, really something else. But here in the States, I mean, Marcello's all over JFK. Like it's like New Orleans was a staging zone for almost tons of people. But you also mentioned E. Howard Hunt. There's been suspicions. I've heard rumors that Raul was Hunt. Have you ever heard those?
Well, that's what James Earl Ray told me. And that's what he told the House Select Committee on Assassinations as well. He pointed him out in a picture, and he said that's the one. If I was to say anyone who looks like Raul, that's the one. Basically, he said that's him. He had E. Howard Hunt. He was James Earl Ray's handler ever since. James Earl went to Canada. After he escaped, he went to Canada, and he was in the Neptune bar there, and that's where he met E. Howard Hunt and Lucian Sardi. Lucian Sardi and E. Howard Hunt met James Earl Ray there. They hired James Earl Ray to start running drugs for them and do mafia business. And that's where it all began as far as James Earl Ray is concerned. That
was after the death of MLK, right, or before?
No, it was before. That was like a year before. Yeah, that was a year before. This is when they started setting him up to be the fall guy. See, he came under their control, and he went to Mexico for them. He did some illegal activities in Mexico. Went over to I'll tell you a little story that very few people have ever known anything about. Jimmy told me that when he was in the Tijuana area, one of the jobs that they had him involved in was a job that related to snuff films. Do you have any idea what I mean? I
know, yeah, very much so. Somebody killed in a recorded video. Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into details about that. They can look it up or whatever. But it's a horrible thing. But Jimmy was involved with the mafia in some dealings that was involving snuff films, and he would not do it. He said that's where I drew the line. They ended up they didn't like that. They ended up sending him to Los Angeles, but they were still preparing him to take the fall for the King thing. So they still kept him. Sent him to Los Angeles. They brought him back to Memphis. When he came back to Memphis, he said he went through Memphis and then to New Orleans. And the last time he was in New Orleans before he went to Atlanta, and then they set up the Memphis thing for the assassination, is when he became a made mob guy.
Wow, so he was made. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's when
So so James Earl Ray was made. So he went through like the ritual or something, huh?
That's right. In New Orleans, he became a made man, and then of course that's when he moved to Atlanta. That's when they sent him down to Birmingham to buy that gun, and that's when all the pieces started coming together. And of course they sent him to Memphis on the day that King was shot. Now another thing that really blows the whole case against James Earl Ray, and they knew it back then, but they wouldn't. They would never let it get out. And we even had that bullet checked in 77. Jack Kershaw and I had that bullet, and the Assassinations Committee helped us have that bullet checked more than once, have it tested against that gun that supposedly was the gun that James Earl Ray bought and was found out in front of that amusement company, supposedly the murder weapon. Well, it's not the murder weapon. The bullet does not match. That bullet that killed Martin Luther King to this day does not match the gun that they said James Earl Ray used to shoot him with. There's no murder weapon. They had no case. If it had ever went to trial, he would not have been convicted. And that's why they refused to ever give the man a trial.
Yeah, it's a shame because he died in jail. Like how long he was in jail? Yeah, fairly. Case after case, civil cases, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, he really they gave him the treatment. It's too bad. Wow. I mean, there's a lot there. That's an amazing case too, because we were talking too. Like they killed. I think somebody killed Martin Luther King's mom.
Yeah,
she was shot in church. His brother died in a pool. Like a supposedly a really good swimmer too. Like just found dead in the pool. So there was a lot of murders around the 60s and the 70s, especially like I mentioned, the house.
Yeah. His son Derek told me that his dad he had went to bed and his dad was upsetting and setting up in the living room when he went to bed. He said that there was no sign, there was no reason, there was just the fact that he would have done that to himself was just completely ridiculous.
Was MLK's brother supposedly drowned or did that?
Right.
Yeah, it's super suspicious, especially in the context of everything else,
Right.
I mean, and it's very much overlooked. It's hard for me. I mean, I do a lot of reading, but you kind of don't hear the story of his mother and brother in the context, in addition to MLK, right?
Right.
Yeah. So E. Howard Hunt. I mean, that guy's all over the place. He's all over the Bay of Pigs, JFK, Watergate, MLK. Just doesn't stop.
And he admitted before he died, he confessed to being involved in the John F. Kennedy assassination.
Yeah. Said he was a bag man or something, which you can't really trust. You can't trust him either. None of those guys are really pretty honest. I know that E. Howard Hunt was the head of domestic operations for the CIA at one point.
That's right.
Which they're not supposed to be involved in according to the law, which you wonder how much of it applies. Or clearly it's selectively applied. According to the law, the CIA is not supposed to have any domestic involvement, which is a total joke.
Right. Yeah, that's right, and that's why they hire the mob to help them out. They hire mafia types to front things for them and to help with
tons. There's all those guys. It was there was Harvey was like personal friends with what was his name? Johnny Rosselli. These guys are not just business partners, personal friends.
Yeah.
And so it's a strange world, and it actually does kind of tie into Sinatra and the Rat Pack in Palm Springs in weird ways. Most people don't know that, but it really is true.
When I went to to New York City the first time, they took me right out to Jimmy Durani's house. That's where I stayed. I met Jimmy, and I stayed at his house while I was there. And who was I? I was 21-year-old, 21-year-old, 22-year-old young singer, but I hit New York City. I did it all, my brother. Did it all.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot more. You had a lot of other things going on in your life. I mean, I would recommend people checking out this book at first person account of all these things. But I mean, you were kind of like a clandestine operator too, in some ways.
Well, I had, yeah, that was my job in the Navy during the Vietnam War. I did operations. I get threatened from the president's office, my senator, my congressman. I've been threatened by all of them. Told
Yeah, you said Cornyn, who was just on, like, it's crazy to think about it because they're talking about he's on some hearing about somebody trying to kill Trump.
Right.
And they're talking to you like, don't talk, like,
exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, what they say is, to give you to capsule it into like one kind of a remark that they would use is something like, that you have signed agreements to keep certain secrets, and there are consequences to not keeping those secrets, right? So that's the gist of it. And I say, yes, right. I do know that. And the consequences are very severe. I mean, they go from termination to spending the rest of your life in federal prison.
Right. And I bet there's thousands of people like you too, that they just can't talk. For somebody who's been through and looked at the MLK assassination and worked in the military, what's your take on the whole Trump thing that happened on July 13th?
Well, one of the things I am really careful about is speaking on things that I did not personally investigate myself. Okay. So I will refrain from getting, because there again, I would have to spend a year and spend blood, sweat, and tears really looking at that from every angle and real close and interviewing people really before I would want to make a comment about it.
Very wise. That's
but I can tell you this: there's a lot there that needs to be looked at. I'll put it that way.
Oh, that's very good. Very political. We are at the 50-minute mark. I got to run out, but really great to talk with you. Super interesting autobiography. So people check that out. Where can people, if they want to reach out to you? You have a website. You have you have a ministry too, right? So
yeah.
And I saw that some of your music is on YouTube, so people can.
Well, yeah. So I've got over 200 songs released, recordings, iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify. They're all over. I mean, they're everywhere. I've got, my books are around the world. To Live or Maybe Not could be found just about any bookstore in the world. If they don't have it, they can get it right away. So, yeah, it's out there. Just To Live or Maybe Not. And that, when I started writing the book, I thought, you may not live tomorrow when you start writing this. So the title was very appropriate.
Right. I mean, it's important that people, put down those writings from their own perspective, especially with the stuff they left. So thanks for writing the book. And again, the full title of the book is To Live or Maybe Not, and the author is Gary Revel, Revel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, stay there.